So this is where the band, Second Adolescence, does its rehearsal, and this is where we also cut tracks. So we have a very nice Premier studio kit here with a birch drum, and the bass drum needs a little bit of damping for the kind of jazz that we play, but it's a nice kit, makes plenty of noise. When we're doing gigging work, our keyboard player uses the Roland RD150, and sometimes for recording he might use the vibe sounds and all that kind of thing. Now when we're cutting tracks, he also likes to use an acoustic piano. So that's where we have our Blüthner grand piano. And the Blüthner is interesting because it has a range of strings at the top here for 2 octaves that are not actually struck or damped. They just sit there tuned to the same note as the string beneath them, and so they're called drone strings, and they carry on resonating afterwards. So when you're making a piano like that, you want to try and capture that sound also. Now I don't have the disadvantage that a lot of people who live in cities and towns. I don't have any road noise out here at all. I have the occasional dog barking, and this is the southern Portugal, so I have some Mr. EasyJet and Mr. Ryanair are flying overhead quite regularly, but I don't have a lot of ambient noise. But obviously when you're making a piano in a home studio situation, you need to take precautions regarding that. And I also don't have plexiglass perspex screens for the drum kit, so when our drummer is beating all hell out of those, I still really want to be able to keep the tracks, because it's stereo, from the piano separate from that, so I can make adjustments to those sounds and adjust the level without having the drums coming through in any major way. Or indeed things like the saxophone, if that's going at the same time. It's nice to be able to keep that separate from the grand piano, and that's why I use the C-ducer microphone. This is a tape mic. It's actually a contact condenser mic. It's flexible and it sticks underneath the piano, and it's you have 2 of them. I'll show you where to put those. Also, as a matter of interest, you can use it on acoustic stringed instruments, like they have a shorter one for the violin, but for like the bass, double bass, that kind of thing, or the shorter one can be on the banjo also. It's very, very good. If you've got a guitar that doesn't have an inbuilt pickup, it's a very good recording sound. You cannot get super high levels of sound out of it. If you're playing live and you're trying to get kind of a rock level, that's not going to hack it. But then you'll be using a Takamine or Ovation or something like that. So anyway, that's an aside really. So 2 of these on the piano is what I use to record. It's been around a long time, this thing. It's been around 35 years, something like that. And it really has been used by a lot of top players. The reason I got into it is because I'm a Dave Brubeck enthusiast. And I happened to see on the back of one of their albums, the Russian Nights album, that a credit to C-ducer. They said we couldn't have made this album and done this recording. It was a live environment in Russia because of the equipment that they were allowed to bring in or could find there. So they said C-ducer saved that album really. So that got me interested in the C-ducer. Laid out here on the other piano is what you get when you buy the C-ducer, and basically there are you can either buy a stereo system or a mono system. Now they both have 2 of these tapes, okay, which is the basic C-ducer tape. Every now and again the company comes out with a lower noise or a slightly different version. The stereo system keeps the 2 tapes totally separate, So you get two of these C-ducer condenser microphones, which is basically what they are. They're a contact condenser mic. And then you get a little XLR connector there with the electronics in it. This houses the preamp. Now you can either get the system such as this one, where you've actually got a plug there. So you can leave the C-ducer tape on your piano and then just unplug it and take the rest of it away with you. You don't have to leave it. You can leave the tape on and leave the rest of it somewhere else, which is the most convenient thing, I think. Otherwise you've got to find a way of sort of wrapping up the cables and all that kind of thing. So along with that you get a little handy handbook which gives you an idea of how to attach the C-ducer. It gives you a little bit of a warning about the two types of adhesive, which I'll mention now. It talks very briefly about the other instruments. You can mic double bass, fiddle, any of that family, guitar, banjo. Sometimes they require the slightly smaller mic, harp and the piano. And it gives you just a tiny little diagram there as to how to mic it, but you can work it out from that pretty well. You've also got these two little babies here, which you can use to clip the XLR electronics onto the underneath of the piano. Okay, so if for instance you've got a club or a bar or something like that with a piano in it, you can kind of leave this on the whole time, and they give you the little bits and pieces to kind of wrap it all up. You've also got a little aluminum clip here, which is kind of handy because when you attach this to the underside of the piano, you can stick this a little way down the line, and that's like a strain relief. So that stops this from being pulled off the piano by the weight of the cable. Now there are two sorts of adhesive. They do talk about this in the handbook, but it's really important. This adhesive is incredibly strong, so you only use that when you're absolutely sure that you've got exactly the right spot. In other words, the sound is exactly what you want from the mics, and that you're never going to move those tapes, because the chances are you'll probably have to buy a new set of tapes when you use that. There is also another adhesive which is a much less aggressive adhesive. You might use this on a guitar, for instance, where you'd kind of like there to be some varnish left after you've finished, and this is still pretty sticky, but it's not quite as aggressive as the other one. And then you've also got some little sticky pads that you can use to attach this part of the mic, which basically, as far as I understand it, doesn't really do anything at all much except connect the cable and the element. And you can use these sticky pads. I've already put a couple on here, and you can use that to keep this well attached to the piano as well. So that's your basic kit. They also do not just a mono piano, which has got two tapes, but a mono other instruments, which is just basically that. So those are the various options. And now I'll go ahead and show you actually how to install it. So this is the inside of the top of the Blutner. We're going to put the tapes on the underside, but it's easy to explain what we're going to do by looking at the top first. These are the suggested positions for the tapes on the piano, and you can see what you need to be doing. If we have a look here, this is the bridge for the bass strings. Okay, everything this side of that is dead space, and so basically you're going to put the C-ducer on the underside just to this side of that bridge. You don't want the C-ducer to cross the bridge, they warn you, and indeed it does give some pretty weird sounds if you do that. This piece over here that you can see that goes right along here, under through here and up round here, that of course is the bridge for the treble strings. So the other tape is going to go sort of something like kind of there. I mean, it can go further down, but you get a good definition if you're going to go sort of somewhere in this region here. Once again, all happening on the underneath. So the critical things are: do not under any circumstances cross those bridges. You get really weird phase effects. And the second thing is you've got two types of adhesive that are supplied with the C-ducer. One is a really serious adhesive. I mean, the kind of thing that Volvo uses to stick their labels on their cars. And when you use that, you will not get the C-ducer tape off. So you've got to be sure that A, you're never going to want to put it on another piano, and B, that you've got exactly the right position you want. So that one doesn't get used in my book. I just use the regular tape and then the little clips that I'll show you later that actually sort of keep the thing restrained. So we'll have a look at the underneath now. So I've got the sticky pad under here, so this isn't going anywhere. I put the strain relief here. It can go anywhere you like as long as it relieves the strain. And then the cable, basically, I'll probably put a couple more of those little aluminium clips. And then at the back of the piano here, I've got the two nylon clips with holding the XLRs. And then the bass one, you can see there. Remember, this is the this little row of screws here is the bass bridge, so I want it not crossing it, so that's butting up to the bridge. I didn't want it to get too close to that one because I don't want it to cross that, which is the other end of the upper string bridge. So basically that should be doing a nice job there on the bass. So sometimes we find ourselves in a pub kind of environment and we need to mic an upright piano. So I just thought I'd show you that real quick. This happens to be a U3 Yamaha. It's a 52-inch, which basically has a grand piano harp lying on its side. We're lucky if we go to a club and find anything quite this nice, but it is a really beautiful piano. Anyway, so it's really the same as a grand piano, but as I say, lying on its side. The two sets of lower bridges, you have this bridge here, which is the treble strings, and that goes sort of all the way along the top. And then this one, where the strings basically go up from that, is for the bass. So you can see we've got one C-ducer sitting there, and that's sort of roughly in the middle. I mean, you can put it higher if you like, it doesn't really matter. You just need to have the space to do it. It doesn't make a lot of difference in terms of the sound. Once again, make sure you don't cross that line of the bridge, and the same thing down here with the bass strings. I do get involved in recording other types of musical instrument than are used in jazz, and this is sort of fairly typical of some of the older English instruments that I have recorded in the studio. It happens to be from the middle of the 1800s, and it's a forte piano. Just has one pedal, which is the sustain pedal, and it really is a quite magnificent instrument. It's got all this beautiful filigree work that we have to be a little bit careful of. Anyway, making these things is not necessarily a lot of fun. This happens to be a little bit easier than some because it actually makes more noise than some of them do. I mean, if you get to mic like a Celeste or something like that, you have a challenge because the noise that the actual movement of the keys make can sometimes be overwhelming compared to the noise that the strings made when they're struck, or in the case of the harpsichord, when they're plucked. So some of these instruments can be a little bit of a challenge. The other challenge with this is that you can't get to the underside of the soundboard. It is a solid wood base under there. So you just have to use a little bit of improvisation. I still use the C-ducer on this kind of instrument because the actual string sounds come through much better than they do with an acoustic microphone. So most of this actually just lifts out. I'm not. This is not requiring any sort of screwdriver or disassembling, thankfully. I wouldn't get involved in that. And what we have here is something very similar to a sort of miniature contemporary keyboard. You have the bass strings and the treble strings, but they're all sort of in one line. It's not as if you have two sets to do. So there's two things you can do. You can just record it in mono, or you can record it in stereo, and I'll show you how we might do that with this instrument. The first thing you have to do is to be fairly diligent about cleaning the dust off the soundboard, because this adhesive is not going to tolerate too much in the way of dust, and the tape will just come off and the sound will not be good. It has to have a good contact with the wood. So here we have no problem at all. We can just slip that out. You saw how we mic'd it on the piano, on the guitar, where we just attached it to the wood. We can do exactly the same here, and we'll just use something to make sure that that is firmly attached. Just press that down with a little sort of ice cream popsicle stick or something like that. At this end, if you wanted it in stereo, you could do the same thing. You get a long tape that will go down through there. You could also use a short tape on this instrument, so you could pop that under there, and the sound will not be dramatically different. And sometimes on some instruments you don't have enough room here to get the full C-ducer 8-inch tape. So to show you this a little bit more close up, the tape is going to go something like that. Basically, if you can get the tape stuck into that sort of position, and then if you want to get another tape here, you'll get a subtly different sound, and that will give you a stereo effect. I mean, it won't necessarily be sort of bass at one end and treble at the other, and that's not necessarily why I use stereo, because stereo can be used just to add a certain depth to the sound, and that's kind of what I do here. Obviously with this kind of instrument, your varnish, the texture of this varnish may be a little fragile, so I never use the super stick that they supply on this. That's how you might be miking an old instrument. I mean, from the square piano like this one right down to harpsichord. Works very well on harpsichord. There, of course, the strings are plucked and not hit, but basically the same rules apply right down to the other smaller instruments like the Celeste.